Between 2014 and 2017, someone was flooding the UK with 250,000 fake Xanax pills every single day. Someone who built a £20 million drug empire right under everyone's nose. But it was not the police who noticed it first. It was Pfizer's counterfeit alert team. They started their own investigation after getting reports stated about mysterious overdoses from pills that looked identical to ones they produced. So, who was the criminal mastermind who was selling these pills? And did Pfizer's corporate investigation bring down this million-dollar drug empire? The man we are exposing today went by the name Hulked Benzo Boss online. His real name was Mark Ward. He looked exactly like what you would expect from someone with that username. Thick neck, broad shoulders, the kind of guy who could bench press anything he wanted. But Mark was more than just a simple drug dealer standing on street corners. He was something far more dangerous. He was a criminal with a brain. While teenagers were collapsing across the UK, Mark was living his best life. Instagram stories showed him sipping 12 50-pound bottles of Cristal Rose in 5-star hotels, wearing designer watches, smoking Cuban cigars, and enjoying exotic holidays. He flaunted his life for his followers to see. He wanted people to know he was rich, but he didn't want them to know why. But one thing you need to know about Mark is that he was not working alone, and he certainly was not working on a small scale. He had a garage in Kent where industrial pill presses worked for him around the clock. These were not simple machines either. Mark had invested in machinery that could punch out tens of thousands of tablets per hour. Custom steel molds stamped perfect logos onto every bar. Blue ones, green ones, white ones, all mimicking legitimate Xanax so well that even pharmacists could not tell the difference at first glance. The genius was in his production, yes, but also in the system. While other drug dealers were getting arrested for obvious mistakes, Mark's operation was invisible. He had no street corners, carried out no hand-to-hand transactions, and never had any territorial disputes. Instead, he built an empire on the dark web. He would operate under vendor profiles like Atlas UK. The account became one of Europe's most active benzo sellers, with clean listings, discreet packaging, and a loyal customer base. But the pills flooding the UK were not actually Xanax. They were something else entirely. Mark and his crew were ordering raw ethizolam powder from China, disguised as supplements or research chemicals. Customs rarely flagged them. After all, who suspects a protein powder shipment? Once the chemicals landed in the UK, they were moved to the labs where the real magic happened. The powder was pressed into pills that looked identical to pharmaceutical-grade Xanax, but with one terrifying difference. The dosing was completely unpredictable. Some batches were so weak that they barely had any effect. Others were dangerously overdosed, and some had nothing but shock and food coloring. Not only that, Mark had built an entire branding pipeline. Pills were vacuum sealed, shrink wrapped, and packed inside protein powder tubs or multivitamin containers. Labels were printed on site. Some orders even came with fake pharmaceutical leaflets to make them look official. People were literally picking up what they thought were legal supplements from their letterboxes while their neighbors walked by completely oblivious. The payment system was even more sophisticated. Mark's network operated through at least 38 different crypto wallets, all of which tracked to the same operation. Payments were made in Bitcoin. Orders were processed through encrypted browsers. Tracking information was stored on burner phones and deleted regularly. They had given up the muscle and intimidation tactics of traditional drug rings in exchange for invisibility. Each person in Mark's network had a specific role. Christopher Kirkby was his right hand. He kept the packaging operation running, printing labels, filling boxes, and coordinating drops. He also managed secure communications through encrypted apps. These apps were the digital lifeline that kept the operation running smoothly. Thomas Durden managed the garage operations. He monitored production, cleaned the machines, and prepped the powders. Then there were the smaller players. There was Charlton Pascal and John Turner, who moved parcels and acted as intermediaries when the main crew needed to stay off-grid. They didn't look like criminals. They didn't even act like street thugs or mafia dons. They looked like ordinary guys. They were gym enthusiasts, millennials who knew about technology and heavy machinery. So the kind of people you would sit next to at Starbucks without a second thought. And that's exactly why it worked. While Mark was posting Instagram stories from luxury hotels and teenagers were being rushed to hospitals, his operation was producing 250,000 pills every single day. 250,000 fake Xanax bars were flooding the UK market daily. The demand made perfect sense. Xanax had exploded in UK pop culture. Young people were taking it recreationally, some thinking it helped with anxiety, others just wanting the drowsy high. Many mixed it with alcohol, trying to black out completely. The problem was that UK doctors rarely prescribed Xanax, so the only way to get it was through the black market. So, Mark was filling the gap, and the most terrifying part is that he was getting away with it. Mark Ward thought he was untouchable. He had built the perfect crime. His business was invisible, digital, and profitable beyond his wildest dreams. But he made one big mistake. He forgot that when you were selling fake versions of someone else's product, that someone might actually be paying attention. You see, Pfizer had something Mark didn't know about. A global security division staffed with former law enforcement and intelligence officers. These are not some guys in corporate suits in boardrooms. These were ex-cops, ex-MI5 agents, people who knew how to hunt criminals. And in 2016, they started noticing something very wrong. Reports were flooding in from across the UK and Europe. People were overdosing on Xanax. Kids were being hospitalized. Emergency rooms were seeing a surge in mysterious cases. But the thing that made Pfizer's blood run cold was that they don't even sell Xanax in the UK. Every single overdose and every hospital report connected to pills that should not have existed. Pfizer's team could not wait for the authorities to act. Children were mistaking the colorful fake pills for sweets. At least one school had found kids in possession of them. This was becoming a public health emergency. So, they started their own investigation. The pharmaceutical company quietly began buying samples from every source they could find. Dark web vendors, social media resellers, classified sites. If someone was selling fake Xanax, Pfizer was buying it. They ran lab tests on each batch, and what they discovered was absolutely terrifying. Some pills contained no afrazolam at all, just binding agents and food coloring. Others had doses 5 times higher than safe levels, but the worst ones contained atizolam, a drug that looks like Xanax and acts like Xanax, but is up to 10 times more potent. If you mix that with alcohol, you will most certainly be dead. As Pfizer's investigators dug deeper, they started noticing patterns. A huge number of these deadly pills were being traced back to addresses in the UK, mostly around Kent, the West Midlands, and smaller nearby towns. But these were not hitting major distribution networks. They were being shipped in small, consistent batches to individuals, hidden inside protein shake tubs, cereal boxes, and ordinary bubble mailers. The packaging was smart. In fact, it was too smart for street dealers. This was the work of someone who understood how to avoid detection by border agents and postal inspectors. Someone who had studied the system and found its weaknesses. But then, Mark made the mistake that would destroy everything. He started bragging. A dark web seller known as Hulked Benzoboss should have stayed anonymous, should have kept his mouth shut. He should have just taken the money and disappeared. But Mark's ego was bigger than his brain. He started talking about being Europe's #1 Xanax baron. He detailed how many orders he handled daily. He said it was up to 75. He even revealed that he could press 250,000 pills in 24 hours. That kind of bragging leaves digital footprints, and Pfizer's investigators knew how to follow them. They noticed that the language and timestamps of the seller matched UK time zones. His posts were often made during typical work hours in the UK. The packages he shipped were intercepted by customs and flagged because the senders kept reusing the same mailing patterns, same package style, same drop-off locations, and even same courier services. That repetition was the break investigators needed. But the real smoking gun was simpler than anyone expected. The packages that Pfizer tested included a special label. It was a sticker from a protein supplement company. That same sticker appeared on multiple packages from different addresses. Mark's gang was literally branding their own downfall. They also started tracing usernames. Some vendors used slight variation of the same dark web handles. Hulk Benzoboss, Hulk Press UK, Santa Claus. The pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention. Still, Pfizer didn't make arrests because they couldn't. They were not law enforcement. But they put together something arguably more dangerous than handcuffs: a complete internal intelligence file. They documented everything from test buys and chemical analysis to distribution methods, online behavior, and suspected mailing hubs. In the end, they handed the file over to the authorities like a gift-wrapped case. The moment that file hit the desks of UK law enforcement, Mark Ward's world started crumbling. The entire pace of the investigation changed overnight. This became a multi-agency criminal probe involving the Southeast Regional Organized Crime Unit, Thames Valley Police, financial crime specialists, and cyber experts. At the heart of it all was a single username: Hulk Benzoboss, the seller who had claimed very publicly to be Europe's largest Xanax distributor. That ego was going to be his downfall. From that point on, investigators watched, traced, and mapped out every move quietly for months. They had Pfizer's dossier as their starting point, but now they needed to link it to real-world addresses, names, patterns, and activity. The first breakthrough came from tracking packages intercepted at sorting facilities. They were traced back to addresses around Ashford in Kent, and a few in the West Midlands, especially near Wolverhampton. Then came the digital manhunt. Investigators used metadata from online postings, order timestamps, and buyer reports to triangulate when and where shipments were being processed. One of the major cracks came when they traced several Bitcoin transactions tied to vendor accounts like Hulk Benzoboss and Santa Claus. Following the money trail led them straight to Mark Ward. On paper, he was a low-profile personal trainer, but digitally, he was operating one of the UK's most dangerous pharmaceutical fraud schemes. 2 lives, 1 man, and investigators now had him in their crosshairs. They started watching him closely. They noticed he was not working alone. Christopher Kirkby, Thomas Durden, and the others were all under surveillance now. Once law enforcement had everything mapped, they prepared to strike. They raided the garages. They discovered pill presses capable of producing up to 250,000 tablets a day, along with custom molds used to mimic real pharmaceutical logos. They recovered over 100,000 pills, tens of thousands of pounds in cash, Rolex watches, designer goods, and even a gold bullion bar. The authorities realized that Mark Ward had been living like a king, but his empire was built on drug money. The worst part is that his operation had gotten so big that his pills were showing up in schools. Teenagers were taking them at parties, unaware they were swallowing unregulated chemicals. Hospitals were seeing a surge in Xanax-linked emergencies, but most of the pills were not even real Xanax. It was a full-blown public health disaster. Mark Ward had built the perfect digital empire, but he had one weakness that would destroy everything. He could not resist being famous. The champagne bottles on Instagram, the designer shoes, the bragging about being the boss of Europe's biggest Xanax operation. Mark thought he was untouchable. That's why he was bragging, but he forgot that real criminals stay invisible and wannabe celebrities get caught. And that's exactly what happened. Authorities had been watching him for months. They tracked his movements, mapped his network, and then they finally struck. Coordinated raids hit his residence and those of his key accomplices. Mark Ward, Christopher Kirkby, and Thomas Durden were all arrested in a single sweep. Police also collected a ton of digital evidence. Their phones were seized, and their laptops were confiscated. When investigators decrypted their messages, they found a complete business operation disguised as a criminal enterprise. Detailed customer lists, price structures, pill formulations, and even customer service messages. These guys ran it like a legitimate company. But that was not even the full network. The investigators identified 8 other people connected to the operation, so 10 criminals in total. It was a distributed system where each person would play their part, but every thread pointed back to that same cocky username, Hulked Benzo Boss. The arrests happened in waves throughout 2017 and 2019. The authorities conducted a methodical takedown of an organized crime network. The court case was built slowly, piece by piece, using digital trails, pharmaceutical analysis, surveillance footage, and encrypted chat logs. So, by the time it reached the courtroom, the prosecution had built an unbreakable case. And what made it all possible was one file from Pfizer. If they hadn't flagged the odd side effects and traced those fake pills back to their source, it might have taken years for police to connect the dots. But once that pharmaceutical intelligence hit the right desks, it gave authorities a direct map to Mark's empire. Mark Ward may have thought he was safe behind a username and encrypted communications. He had the technical skills to build an invisible criminal network. But in the end, it was not the technology that gave him away. It was his need to be seen. It was his Instagram posts. It was his habit to show off that got him caught. While Mark built his empire, he made another huge mistake. He documented everything. Every luxury purchase, every champagne bottle, every designer watch, it all went on Instagram. He posted pictures with captions like "living like a gangster" and photos of him smoking cigars in 5-star hotels. He might as well have sent the prosecutors a gift basket. Chris Kirkby made the same mistake. He posted a photo flexing with a bottle of Cristal Rosé. The final bill was £16.79, proudly snapped at the Mandarin Oriental in London. Durden and Kirkby also shared pictures popping champagne in fancy Knightsbridge clubs. They had a long streak of luxury posts, tagged with things like #millionaire lifestyle. Those posts became evidence in court. Prosecutors literally showed the jury Mark's Instagram feed, proving exactly how proud he was of his crimes. But the real smoking gun was the money trail. Mark pushed most of his cash into cryptocurrency, mostly Bitcoin. In 2016 and 2017 alone, he pocketed around £216 million in crypto. Overall, investigators believe the gang made over £20 million. They tried to hide it through dozens of wallet transfers and back-and-forth exchanges. But police brought in crypto analysts who traced every single transaction. Once they matched the blockchain activity with Know Your Customer data from exchanges like Local Bitcoins, the game was over. During the raids, they seized £13 million worth of Bitcoin from just one member's wallet. Another £109,000 in cash and crypto was found in Mark's office. Kirkby's unreported £80,000 Audi R8 was flagged too. Everything the gang touched got seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act. Assets were frozen. Cars, cash, and crypto. All of it was pulled in for forfeiture. That luxury lifestyle they were bragging about online became a list of confiscated items. And when it came time to face the consequences, there was no room to spin it. In May 2023, 5 core members, including Mark, Kirkby, and Durden, pleaded guilty. The evidence was too much to ignore. Mark Ward received 5 years in prison. Thomas Durden got 6.5 years. Chris Kirkby received 9.5 years. The other 2 co-conspirators also received multi-year sentences, but these 3 were the top of the chain. But What stings the most is that their operation flooded fake medication into the market. There were overdoses and hospitalizations. Over 200 people were hospitalized in the UK in just 1 year because of fake Xanax. Most of them were teenagers. Kids who thought they were taking legitimate medication ended up fighting for their lives in emergency rooms. And the mastermind of all this got 5 years. 5 years for running a multi-million-pound operation that put hundreds of people in the hospital. 5 years for flooding schools with fake pills. Is that justice? We have seen longer sentences for crimes involving less money, fewer victims, and no international reach. Mark Ward built an empire on poison. He made millions while teenagers collapsed. He lived like a king while kids fought for their lives. And after all of that, he got 5 years. You tell us, was that enough?